Caleb Thornton had buried enough people to know what silence cost. Dawn crept over Cedar Bend Ranch in thin, colorless light as he stood alone on the porch, one hand resting on the fence rail he had repaired more times than he could remember. The land breathed the way it always had, slow, indifferent, enduring, and he had shaped his life to match it. No promises, no plans that reached beyond the next season. No one left behind to carry his absence like a wound. He had learned that lesson early from his father, from his brother, from the woman he once believed would grow old beside him. If I love again, he thought, the question rising unbidden, what do I leave behind? That was when he saw her. A lone figure stood at the edge of his land, still, as if the earth itself had paused to place her there. Young Apache, watching him not with fear, but with quiet resolve. Something shifted inside Caleb, small, unwelcome, and irreversible. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel safe. Cedar Bend Ranch lay where the land turned inward on itself, a slow curve of river cutting through dry earth like a held breath. The water never rushed. It moved with patience, polishing stone, feeding cottonwood and cedar them washed in that clung stubbornly to the banks. The air smelled of dust, sun-warmed grass, and the faint sharpness of cedar sap. Wind passed through the valley without apology, carrying the sound of insects and the distant call of birds that never lingered long. It was a place built for endurance, not comfort. Caleb Thornton had chosen it for that reason. Before we continue, take a quiet moment with this story. These are not tales of easy romance, but of the Wild West, where love is a choice made slowly after loss and hard living. If stories like this still speak to you, let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Your voice helps keep these forgotten roads alive and brings these stories to those who still understand what it means to stay. The ranch sat half a day's ride from Lidge, far enough that the noise of men rarely reached him. His cabin was plain, built by his own hands, thick beams, a low roof, everything measured and necessary, nothing decorative, nothing fragile. He rose before dawn, worked until the light thinned, and slept without dreams when he could manage it. Those who passed through town knew him as quiet, capable, and uninterested in company. That suited him well enough. What they did not see were the spaces he kept untouched, the chair by the hearth no one ever used, the extra cup he never set on the table, the way his gaze sometimes drifted to the far edge of the land, as if expecting someone who never came. Caleb did not speak of his past. He carried it the way the land carried scars, smoothed over by time, but never erased. Atsadi stood at the edge of that world, taking it in with careful eyes. She had traveled light, a small bundle at her side, a narrow band of leather at her wrist worn smooth with age and touch. She moved like someone accustomed to reading ground and sky, placing her feet with quiet confidence. At 20, her youth was unmistakable, but so was the steadiness beneath it. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, her posture straight without stiffness. She did not look around like a trespasser. She looked like someone deciding whether a place might accept her. The world she had come from was not far, low mountains, stone, and wind, but it was already receding behind her since her father's death. The air there had changed. Voices had grown heavier with expectation. Decisions were being made for her, spoken as certainty, not choice. Her mother had watched it happen in silence. Her younger brother had understood without needing words. When Asadi said she needed to go, neither of them tried to stop her. They gave her what they could and let her walk away without shame. She did not come to Cedar Bend Ranch searching for rescue. She came looking for work, for distance, for time enough to decide who she would be when no one else was deciding for her. Caleb noticed details before he noticed anything else. The way she stood without shifting her weight, the way her eyes met his once, then moved on, measuring land instead of men. He saw that she was young, and that knowledge settled heavily in his chest. Youth carried risk. Youth carried futures he had learned not to touch. Still, something about her presence disrupted the careful order he had built. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough to make the air between them feel charged, as if the land itself were waiting to see what he would do. And Caleb Thornton, a man who had survived by keeping his distance, felt the first faint pull of something he had sworn never to invite again. Caleb did not invite her closer. He remained where he was, one hand resting on the fence rail, the other hanging loose at his side, his posture open but unmoving. Years on the frontier had taught him that stillness spoke as loudly as a drawn weapon. He waited to see whether she would cross the line he had never bothered to mark. Atsadi did, not quickly, not with challenge. She stopped a few paces away, close enough to speak without raising her voice, far enough to leave him room to refuse her without embarrassment. The wind lifted a strand of her hair and carried the scent of dust and travel between them. "I want to work," she said. "I just need work. You don't have to pay me much, just a place to sleep. And I won't cross the line you draw." Her English was careful, measured, shaped by use rather than schooling. There was no apology in her tone, no explanation offered beyond the words themselves. Caleb studied her face. Young, yes, but not uncertain. Her eyes were steady, dark, and watchful. The eyes of someone who had learned to read people because not doing so carried consequences. "I don't need anyone, he replied. It was the truth as he had come to define it. The land was manageable. The herd was small. He had arranged his life so that it depended on no one but himself. Atsadi nodded once as if she had expected that answer. She did not step back. "I can work a season," she said. "I don't stay where I'm not wanted." That more than anything caught his attention. Most people pressed. Most people explained. She did neither. Caleb glanced past her toward the open stretch of land that led away from Cedar Bend. He imagined her walking it alone, moving from place to place, meeting eyes less patient than his. He knew the towns. He knew the looks that lingered too long, the hands that reached too easily, the judgments passed without words. "You're young," he said at last. "So are some storms," she answered quietly. "They still know when to leave." The corner of his mouth tightened, not in amusement, but in recognition. He had known men twice her age who had never learned that much. "I don't take on trouble," he said. Atsadi met his gaze fully. "Then I didn't come because you would take me," she said. "I came because you didn't look at me the way other white men do." The words landed without accusation. They were simply placed between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb felt the weight of them settle in his chest. He knew what she meant. He also knew what waited for her if he sent her on. Silence stretched. The wind moved through the grass somewhere along the riverbank. A bird lifted and flew. Finally he spoke. "One season," he said. "You work, I pay you. When the harvest is done, we part ways." No warmth, no promise beyond what was said. Atsadi inclined her head. "That's enough." She turned then, already adjusting her bundle, already moving as if the decision were settled. Caleb watched her walk toward the cabin, toward the barn, toward the life he had kept carefully contained. He told himself it was only a season. But as he followed her with his eyes, a familiar thought surfaced, one he had learned to fear more than loneliness. Beginnings were dangerous, and he had just agreed to one. The season settled in quietly, as if the land itself were careful not to disturb what had begun. Caleb showed Atsadi the work without ceremony, the boundaries of the ranch, the temper of the herd, the places along the riverbank where the ground gave way if you trusted it too quickly. He spoke only when necessary, his instructions brief, practical. She listened without interruption, watching his hands as much as his face, learning the rhythm of the place the way she had learned every other ground she had ever walked. She worked hard, harder than he expected, and with a steadiness that never asked to be praised. She rose before the sun and returned to the cabin with the light thinning behind her, dust on her clothes, fatigue in her shoulders that she never complained about. When she did speak, it was to ask questions that showed she was thinking ahead, about weather, about the way the herd shifted when storms threatened, about which fence posts rotted first and why. Caleb noticed things he wished he did not. He noticed that she learned quickly, adjusting her movements to the animals instead of forcing them. He noticed the way she paused at the river some mornings, letting the cold water run over her hands as if grounding herself before the day began. He noticed that his work slowed when she was nearby, not from distraction, but from care. He measured his steps more carefully. He chose his words with a precision he had not practiced in years. None of that frightened him at first. What frightened him was how natural it felt. The ranch changed in ways that were difficult to name. Meals were no longer eaten standing. The fire was built earlier in the evening. There were moments, small, unguarded, when Caleb found himself waiting, listening for her step outside before he set down his tools. Each time he caught himself doing it, he corrected course. Distance had kept him alive. He would not forget that now. Silas Fitch noticed. The old trader arrived one afternoon as he always did, his horse moving at an unhurried pace, the weight of years in every motion. He nodded to Atsadi without comment, then turned his attention to Caleb, eyeing the half-finished fence line. "You're working slower," Silas said. Caleb shrugged. "Fence isn't going anywhere." Silas gave a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. "Neither are most things," he said. "People do." He said no more. He never did. He traded his goods, took his leave, and rode on. But the words stayed behind like a stone dropped into still water. As summer pressed toward its height, Atsadi began to speak more freely, not about where she came from, at least not at first, but about small things. How her mother used to watch the weather instead of the calendar, how her younger brother had learned to follow her tracks before he could read. These were not confessions. They were offerings, given carefully, as if she were testing whether the space between them could hold such weight. Caleb listened. He did not interrupt. He did not share in return. At night, when the ranch settled into its familiar quiet, memory crept in uninvited. His father's hands, rough and sure, guiding his own on a plow handle. His brother's laughter, cut short by a moment that had not seemed dangerous until it was too late. Margaret's voice, soft, certain, speaking of a future he had believed in without reservation. He had buried each of them in different years under different skies, but the ground had accepted them all the same. He had promised himself then that he would not build a life that required another grave. By late summer, the promise was beginning to fray. The thought of Atsadi leaving at season's end no longer brought relief. It brought a tightness in his chest that he could not work away. He found himself watching her with an attention that bordered on fear, not of her, but of what staying might cost him. Atsadi felt the shift as well. She did not press him. She did not speak of what came next. But there were moments when her gaze lingered, when her steps slowed, as if waiting for him to match them. She had come seeking the right to choose. What she found was a place that asked her to decide whether she would claim it. The days shortened, the harvest neared its end. The land began to release its hold on summer, and Caleb Thornton, who had survived by keeping his life small and contained, realized that something had taken root inside that he could not fence out forever. Autumn came without asking permission. The morning sharpened first. Breath showed in the air before the sun cleared the ridge, and the river carried a colder voice as it moved through the bend. Caleb felt the change in his joints before he saw it in the trees. The work shifted, less mending, more gathering, fewer long days ahead, an ending written into the land itself. He did not say anything at first. He watched Atsadi finish the last of the harvest with the same care she had given every task. He noted how easily she fit into the rhythm of the place now, how the ranch no longer felt like something she borrowed, but something she understood. That knowledge pressed on him harder than any memory. When he finally spoke, it was in the late afternoon, the light already thinning. "The season's nearly done," he said. Atsadi nodded. She had been expecting the words. Everyone who lived by the land learned to feel endings before they were spoken. "I know." They stood a few steps apart, the space between them familiar and suddenly heavy. Caleb kept his eyes on the fence post he had been tightening, his fingers working the wire longer than necessary. "We agreed," he continued. "When the work was finished, we'd go our own ways." Yes, her voice was even, no accusation, no plea. That steadiness made it harder. Caleb swallowed. "It's better this way." The words tasted like something he had said before, long ago, under different skies. He had believed them then too. Atsadi studied him for a moment, as if searching for something he was not offering. Whatever she saw or didn't, she inclined her head. "I'll leave in the morning," she said. That night, Cedar Bend Ranch felt larger than it ever had. The fire burned low. The silence stretched thin, no longer a shield, but a reminder. Caleb slept poorly, waking before dawn with the certainty that he had already made a mistake he could not name. He did not offer to ride with her. He did not stand on the porch to watch her go. He told himself it was mercy. Distance now would save them both something later. But when he heard the sound of her steps fading down the path, something inside him refused to settle. By mid-morning, she was halfway to Lidge. Caleb found himself saddling his horse without deciding to do so. He told himself he would only follow far enough to see that she reached the road safely. Only that, nothing more. The land between Cedar Bend and Lidge opened wide and exposed, dotted with scrub and stone. From a distance, Atsadi moved like a solitary mark against it, upright, unhesitating. Caleb kept his distance, staying downwind, using the terrain the way years of habit had taught him. Lidge announced itself before it appeared. Noise carried far across open ground. Voices, hooves, the uneven clatter of life compressed into too small a space. Caleb slowed as the town came into view, watching Atsadi enter the street and blend into the movement. For a moment, nothing happened. She walked with purpose, eyes forward, hands empty and visible. She stopped once at a stall. Oh. Examining an object laid out on rough boards, Caleb saw a man behind her shift impatiently, then push past. The contact was brief, unnecessary. "Watch yourself," the man snapped. "Don't go fingering things you can't afford." Another voice followed, sharper. "Keep an eye on her." The words cut deeper than the shove. Atsadi stiffened, but she did not react. She had learned long before this place what drawing attention could cost. Around them, people looked and then looked away. Caleb felt something break loose in his chest. It was not anger, not at first. It was clarity. This was the world she would walk into alone. This was what waited beyond the quiet bend of the river, beyond the space he had offered her for a season and then withdrawn. The thought that struck him then was simple and terrifying. If he turned away now, this was what he left behind. He did not remember moving. One moment he was watching from the edge of the street. The next he was there, placing himself between Atsadi and the man, his body a barrier that did not ask permission. "She didn't do anything wrong," Caleb said. His voice was low, steady. It carried farther than he intended. The man scoffed, then hesitated. Caleb did not raise his hand. He did not reach for the gun at his side. He simply stood his ground, eyes level, unyielding. "Move on," Caleb added. For a long second, the street held its breath. Then the man stepped back, muttering under his breath, and the crowd loosened around them. Atsadi looked at Caleb, not with surprise, but with something deeper, recognition. He had not planned to follow her into town. He had not planned to stand there, but standing there, he understood something he had spent years avoiding. Loving her did not mean guaranteeing an ending he could not control. It meant refusing to let her face the world alone. And that truth, once seen, could not be unseen. They did not speak as they left Lidge. Caleb walked a step ahead, not to lead, but to keep the space around them clear. Atsadi followed, her pace steady, her face composed, as if the moment in the market had not shaken her. But the silence between them was no longer empty. It carried weight, questions that could not be ignored now that something irreversible had been done. They rode back towards Cedar Bend Ranch under a sky that had begun to pale with late afternoon. Wind moved through the grass in long, deliberate sweeps. The land looked the same as it always had, but Caleb felt as though he were seeing it after a long absence. He broke first. "I didn't plan to follow you," and he said. "I know," Atsadi replied. That was all, no accusation, no gratitude, just understanding. They dismounted near the bend of the river, where the cottonwoods leaned low over the water. Caleb tied the horses and stood for a moment, hands resting on the worn leather of the reins. He had stood on this ground through every season for years, believing it was enough. Now it felt like a place that demanded something from him. "I ended things because I was afraid," he said finally. Atsadi turned toward him, waiting. She had learned when to be still. "I've buried too many people," Caleb continued. The words came slowly, shaped with care, as if each one needed to be set down properly. "My father first, then my brother, then the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. Every time I told myself it was just the way of things, that loving someone meant accepting the cost." He paused, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. What I never accepted was how much it changes you, how you start believing that if you don't begin, you won't have to end. The river moved behind them, patient and unremarkable. Atsadi listened without interrupting, her expression open but guarded, the way it always was when something mattered. When you came here, Caleb said, I told myself it was temporary, safer that way. But watching you in that street today, I understood something I've been hiding from. He met her eyes then. The danger isn't losing you. It's leaving you to face a world that doesn't see you the way you deserve to be seen. For a long moment, Atsadi said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but sure. I didn't leave my people because I was afraid, she said. I left because I wanted the right to choose, to stand somewhere and say yes or no without being decided for. She looked past him toward the ranch buildings in the distance. When you told me the season was over, I believed you were choosing safety, not just for yourself, but for me. I was, Caleb admitted. I was wrong. Atsadi studied him as if weighing the truth of his words against the man standing before her. She had learned not to trust promises spoken too quickly. I don't need you to protect me, she said. I know how to walk alone. I know, Caleb replied. That's not what I'm asking. He drew a slow breath. I'm asking if you'll choose to stay, not because I need you, not because you owe me anything, but because you want to be here and because I'm willing to stop pretending that wanting you here is a weakness. The air between them shifted, not with relief, but with clarity. Atsadi considered the river, the land, the man who stood before her without reaching out. Then she nodded once. I will stay, she said, not because you followed me, but because you didn't turn away. The words settled quietly, without drama, without the weight of a vow. They did not touch. They did not need to. The decision itself was enough. As they walked back toward the ranch together, the light began to soften, stretching long across the ground. Cedar Bend waited ahead, not as a boundary, but as a place that might finally hold more than one life. And for the first time in years, Caleb Thornton did not try to imagine how it would end. They returned to Cedar Bend Ranch as evening settled in, the light thinning into long bands of golden shadow. Nothing about the land had changed, and yet Caleb felt the difference in the way he stepped from the saddle, in the way he did not immediately reach for the habits that had once kept him steady. Atsadi moved beside him without hesitation, not as a guest now, but not yet as something named. The space between them felt intentional, chosen rather than enforced. In the days that followed, the ranch eased into a new rhythm. It was not sudden. There were no declarations that altered the shape of the mornings. Work still needed doing, the herd still needed watching. The river still curved through the bend with the same patient indifference. But Caleb no longer measured his days by what he could finish alone. He found himself thinking in terms of what could be shared without being diminished. Silas Fitch arrived the following week, his horse moving at his familiar unhurried pace. He took in the sight of Atsadi at the table, of the second cup set out without comment, of Caleb listening more than he spoke. Silas said nothing of it at first. He traded his goods, accepted payment, and lingered a moment longer than usual. Some places don't change because the land does, he said at last, his voice mild. They change because someone decides to stay. Caleb nodded, understanding the gift for what it was. Silas did not wait for an answer. He never did. The decision to marry was not made in a single conversation. It grew out of small, deliberate choices. Caleb rode into Lidge with Atsadi at his side and did not flinch at the looks that followed. Atsadi learned the names of the neighbors who mattered and ignored the rest. They spoke often, not to persuade, but to clarify what they expected, what they feared, what they would not ask of one another. When Caleb asked her, it was without ceremony, no ring, no promise beyond what he could stand behind. I can't tell you I'll never lose you, he said. I can tell you I won't leave you to face things alone. Atsadi accepted with the same steadiness she brought to everything else. That's all I would ask. They were married before winter fully set in. The ceremony was simple and lawful. A handful of witnesses, Silas Fitch standing at the back, hat in hand. No music, no speeches meant to impress, just two people making a choice in clear daylight without illusion. Life afterward did not soften into ease. But it widened. Caleb found that the fears he had carried did not vanish. They simply no longer ruled him. Atsadi brought her own ways into the ranch, small rituals, quiet strengths, an ability to see possibility where he had once seen only risk. Together they repaired what needed mending and let the rest be. In time, a child came into their lives, not as a promise fulfilled, but as a continuation. Caleb held the small weight in his arms and felt the old question rise again, not as dread this time, but as responsibility accepted. He understood then that love did not ask for guarantees. It asked for presence. On quiet mornings, he stood by the river with Atsadi and watched the water move through the bend. The ranch no longer felt like a boundary drawn against the world. It felt like a place that could hold them, past, present, and whatever seasons followed. And that, Caleb Thornton knew, was enough. Caleb had always believed that happiness, if it came at all, arrived quietly and left just as quietly. So when he found himself sitting beside Atsadi on the low bench outside the cabin one evening, winter settling in but not yet cruel, he did not mistake the moment for an ending. He understood it for what it was, a pause, a place to breathe. The fire inside crackled softly, its warmth pushing out through the open door. The river carried a darker voice now, fuller with recent rains. Atsadi sat with her hands folded loosely in her lap, watching the last light thin across the valley. "This place still listens the same way," she said, "even when people change." Caleb nodded. "It always has. I just didn't know how to listen before." She turned toward him then, studying his face with that familiar mix of gentleness and clarity. "Are you afraid it won't last?" He considered the question carefully. Once he would have answered too quickly. Now he chose honesty instead. "I'm afraid it will be hard," he said. "I know what this land can take from people. I know what the world can do when it decides not to be kind." Atsadi's mouth curved into a small, knowing smile. "So do I." She reached for his hand, not hesitantly, but without claiming it either. "Just contact, just truth. I didn't come here because I thought life would be easier," she continued. "I came because I wanted to choose where I stood when it wasn't." Caleb closed his fingers around hers. "That's all I have to offer," he said. "A place to stand and the promise that I won't walk away when things turn." She leaned her shoulder against his, the gesture simple, unguarded. "Then we understand each other." They sat like that for a long while, watching the valley settle into night. The ranch lay quiet around them, not empty, not fragile, just alive in its own patient way. Caleb thought of the seasons ahead, of storms and dry years, of disagreements they had not yet had, and losses neither of them could predict. For the first time, those thoughts did not drive him inward. He looked at Atsadi and felt the truth settle where fear once lived. Loving her would not spare him pain. It would not protect either of them from the world's sharp edges, but it would mean that when those edges came, they would meet them together. Later, when the light was gone and the stars spread wide across the sky, Caleb rose and offered her his hand to go inside. Atsadi took it without hesitation. The path ahead was not smooth. They both knew that, but it was chosen, and that made all the difference. The story of Caleb Thornton and Atsadi at Cedar Bend Ranch offers a profound life lesson. Love and connection are not about avoiding pain or guaranteeing a perfect future, but about choosing to stand together in the face of life's uncertainties. Caleb, scarred by loss, built a life of solitude to shield himself from further grief. Yet Atsadi's quiet resolve and courage challenged his fears. Her choice to seek her own path, and his decision to step into her world despite his past, remind us that true strength lies in vulnerability, embracing the risk of loving someone, knowing the world may not always be kind. Their journey teaches us that happiness is not a destination, but a series of small, intentional choices to stay, to listen, to share a life without demanding guarantees. This resonates deeply in our own lives, where fear of loss can keep us from meaningful connections. By choosing presence over isolation, Caleb and Atsadi show us that love, though fraught with challenges, is a commitment to face the unknown together, creating a legacy of resilience and hope. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what lessons you've learned from taking risks in love or life. Your voice keeps these stories alive, connecting us all through shared experiences. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to join our community and never miss another tale of the human spirit. Let's keep exploring the roads less traveled together.